And in the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, please be seated. It is my belief that of the strongest barrier to evangelism is not secular society nor rampant hostility to the gospel. It's not a lack of interest in things holy. It seems to me the strongest barrier to evangelism is the people of God, those of us who call ourselves Christians. It's not because we don't mean well or because we don't care. It's not because we are lazy or we don't try. Mostly it's because we spend a lot of time doing what one of my bosses used to call majoring in the minors, majoring in minor things. You might be surprised to know that this occasionally happens here at St. Matt's. Today in our lessons from the Psalm and from the Gospel, we are met with pastoral images. The shepherd, the shepherd's voice, the sheep, green pastures, still waters. Where do we see ourselves? Are we the sheep? Most people think of sheep as stupid. So obviously I prefer not to be cast in that likeness. Clergy often think of ourselves as shepherds. The commentators I read on Psalm 23 and on the Gospel of John argue that this is a distortion of the text. The shepherd metaphor in the Psalm is about God and God alone, whereas the shepherd metaphor in the Gospel carries the metaphor forward, pointing towards Jesus as the shepherd. When we see ourselves as the shepherd, it makes it hard to be a good sheep. Whether lay or ordained, we are all sheep in John's metaphor. Only Christ is the shepherd. Now, wherever there are sheep, there are usually wherever there are sheep, there are usually gates. At the beginning of this section of John, in chapter 10, Jesus says, "Anyone who does not enter the sheepfold through the gate, but gets in some other way, is a thief and a brigand. The one who enters through the gate is the shepherd of the flock." I'd like for you to consider today as seeing ourselves and yourself as one of the gatekeepers. And when we see ourselves in this way, in doing so, do we open the gate freely for all who ask for entrance? Or do we bar the gate and keep it tightly shut and keep others out? The gate is made to both open and to shut. When Jesus says that he is the gate, he opens to admit all and then closes it to protect them. Jesus is the gate through which his own enter into his protection and move out when he calls them by name, as in baptism, into abundant life. This gospel reading carries a certain exclusivity. The very nature of any revelation that claims to bring salvation excludes those who have not or choose not to hear the message. Yet the gate opens to admit those who follow a different voice for the protection of all. The offer, Jesus' offer, is open to everybody. When morning comes, the sheep follow the voice that they recognize as their shepherd. We follow Jesus because his is the voice that we know will lead us out to the trail that brings us to that heavenly city. And yet Jesus calls us to help keep the gate. To open the gate by opening Jesus' word, by preaching Jesus' good news to those who have not yet heard it, by continuing his ministry of love and care and goodwill. Jesus calls us to participate in the shepherding of his flock, to speak in a voice his own can recognize as coming from him. So do we speak with this familiar voice? Can others hear Jesus' voice in ours. Sheep can tell the difference between their shepherd's voice and that of another. Sheep know who their shepherd is. In our time, in our pluralistic society, there are many voices competing for our attention. We may lose the voice of our shepherd and go astray from time to time and fall into danger, perhaps following a voice that sounds strong and smart and seductive. But the voice is different. We may follow it down a path that leads us away from Christ. We may believe that we are including all people by denying who we are and whose voice has called us. Whose voice do we follow, and with what voice do we speak? What gate do we enter? What gate do we lead others to enter? St. Matthew's has an opportunity to become a gate where the voice of Jesus, granting us the gift of salvation, can be heard in a community that needs to hear it. Too many of our churches have become caught up in legalism and have forgotten that God's grace is freely given and open to everybody. God's love is not exclusive to one group or another. God doesn't just love people who live this way or that. God's salvation through Jesus Christ is a way to salvation that is open to everybody. Jesus, the Good Shepherd, loves his sheep, each and every one of us. There are plenty of exclusive communities in Colorado and in the Grand Valley, protected by gates and guards and alarm systems. Their gates are shut tight to keep others out, to protect their members, to keep away the undesirables. And unfortunately, many of these places are churches. Churches exclude people for any number of reasons. People aren't holy enough, pure enough, or have the right features. We don't have to be one of those churches. Here at St. Matthew's, clergy and lay alike, may we be a sheepfold that recognizes the inherent dignity of all people, and a fold that leaves our gate open to admit all to hear Jesus' gift of abundant life. Where all God's people flourish as we learn to live lives of gratitude, lives of love, and lives of service to each other and to the world that God has created. Amen.